It was a brisk autumn morning in the small town of Maple Creek. The streets were quiet, lined with trees shedding their golden leaves. A young man named Ethan jogged past the familiar coffee shop, his breath visible in the cold air. Ethan was an ambitious software developer in his late 20s, always in a rush, always chasing deadlines, and perpetually glued to his phone. Today was no different. His mind was already racing through the tasks he had lined up for the day. On his way back home, Ethan noticed an elderly woman struggling to open her mailbox. Her frail hands trembled as she fumbled with the keys. Ethan paused for a moment, debating whether he should help, but his phone buzzed with a work notification. He glanced at the screen, hesitated, and walked away, telling himself someone else would assist her. Later that afternoon, Ethan received a package from his mother. Inside was a small wooden box with a note that read, "Family heirlooms, keep them safe." Among the items was a stack of old letters tied with a faded ribbon. Curious, Ethan picked up the top letter. It was addressed to his grandfather and dated September 1945. The handwriting was elegant, the kind that seemed to belong to another era. Ethan began reading. The letter detailed his great-grandfather's experiences during World War II, how he had written to his wife every day, sharing his hopes, fears, and love for her. One line struck Ethan deeply. "The smallest act of kindness can ripple through generations." It was a phrase his mother often repeated, but he'd never understood its origin until now. Ethan's curiosity grew, and he spent the evening reading through the letters, piecing together his family's history. He learned about sacrifices, resilience, and the importance of human connection. For the first time in a long while, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for those who came before him. The next morning, Ethan decided to take a different route during his jog. As he approached the elderly woman's house, he noticed a commotion. An ambulance was parked outside. Neighbors whispered among themselves, and Ethan overheard snippets of their conversation. The woman had collapsed in her home, alone, and had been found hours later by a passerby. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He remembered how he'd ignored her struggle with the mailbox the day before. Determined to make amends, he asked a neighbor about her condition and learned she had been taken to the hospital but had no immediate family to care for her. That evening, Ethan visited the hospital. He didn't know what he was expecting, but he felt compelled to be there. The woman, whose name was Eleanor, lay in a bed, her eyes closed, her face pale but peaceful. Ethan spoke to a nurse and learned that Eleanor had lived alone for decades, her husband having passed away years ago. She had no children, no siblings, only distant relatives she hadn't spoken to in years. Ethan stayed for a while, sitting silently by her side. On the table next to her bed was a small photo frame. It held a black and white picture of a young couple, smiling at each other as if they were the only two people in the world. Ethan realized it was Eleanor and her husband. As he sat there, a nurse approached and handed him a sealed envelope. "We found this in her purse," she said. "It's addressed to someone named Charles. Do you know who that might be?" Ethan shook his head but offered to look into it. At home, he opened the envelope. The letter was dated just a week ago. It was addressed to Eleanor's late husband, Charles, and written as if he were still alive. In it, Eleanor expressed her longing to see him again and her gratitude for the life they had shared. She also mentioned her fear of being forgotten, of leaving the world without making a lasting impact. The words hit Ethan like a thunderbolt. He realized that Eleanor's life, though seemingly quiet and unremarkable, was filled with stories, emotions, and connections that mattered deeply. He thought about how easy it was to overlook someone else's struggles, to assume their lives were insignificant because they didn't intersect with his own. The next morning, Ethan returned to the hospital. Eleanor had regained consciousness and was surprised to see him. Though she couldn't speak much, the gratitude in her eyes was unmistakable. Ethan promised her that she wasn't forgotten and that her stories would live on. He spent hours listening to her memories, jotting down notes, and asking questions about her life. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began volunteering at a local senior center. He shared Eleanor's stories and encouraged others to do the same. He started a blog where he documented the lives of elderly individuals, preserving their histories and giving them a voice. Months later, Ethan's blog gained traction. One day, he received an email from a woman claiming to be Eleanor's distant niece. She thanked him for sharing Eleanor's story and revealed something that made Ethan's heart race. Eleanor's husband, Charles, had been a soldier in World War II. He had served alongside Ethan's great-grandfather and had written letters to Eleanor inspired by the very phrase Ethan had read. The smallest act of kindness can ripple through generations.
Ethan realized that his decision to help Eleanor wasn't just about correcting a moment of neglect. It was part of a larger connection, a ripple started decades ago by his great-grandfather and Charles. The very kindness that had shaped his family's legacy had now come full circle. As Ethan reflected on the events, he understood the profound truth: every action, no matter how small, has the potential to create ripples that transcend time and space. In a world that moves so quickly, it's easy to overlook the lives of others, but by pausing, by caring, we can become part of something far greater than ourselves. And so, the next time Ethan saw someone struggling, he didn't hesitate. Because he knew, a single act of kindness could change everything.